Mr. Unlimited has landed in Jersey. He is now a New York football giant. And you know what? I actually think instead of Hard Knocks for the Giants, they should be giving them Jersey Shore, the NFL edition, starring Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson. But let's go ahead and talk about the New York football Giants. What do they need to do after free agency? Of course, things are still happening. Things can change. But for the most part, the roster is looking pretty set. And now we head into that April month, which is coming up in the draft season. Let's start off with the roster breakdown, though, first, and dissect some things before we get into the actual mock draft itself. And you look at this offensive line, the meat and potatoes up here, the hog mollies. Now, I know, different GM now, but anyway, Andrew Thomas just got to stay healthy. They brought in James Hudson III. Hopefully will be a good swing tackle for them. They also brought in Stone Forsythe. That's really been the big thing for them, is like when they have injuries at the tackle position, that has been a big Achilles heel. They've been trying to, Joshua Zudu. They've been trying with different guys and whatnot. Keep a Zudu in guard. I don't think he's a tackle. And hopefully they can figure something out there with Hudson if they need those guys. The hope is that they'll need those guys. Thomas can be an all-pro player. Just got to stay healthy. Now, my needs here on the roster in terms of this offensive line, you need another guard. They brought back Greg Van Roten on a one-year deal. He's getting older now, 35, still a good player, and certainly somebody that I feel like can start this next season if need be. You got Jay Kubis, nice guy that they picked up there and whatnot. He's, definitely a standout for them and could end up being a player to watch out for. Besides that, though, I don't really see a whole ton in this room that long-term who could be that other guard opposite of John Runyon. And remember, Runyon can move back over to right guard. That might be more of a natural position for him. So I'm not really concerned. Left guard, right guard, let's find somebody on this offensive line that's going to improve. And I do think it is a round 2 through round 3 need at this moment, at least looking at the roster. Yeah, got Aaron Stinney back on a one-year deal. He's a solid depth piece that gives you some versatility. Overall, I will be looking at this interior. It's the bigger need of the bunch on this offensive line. Right tackle of the future, certainly. And I got to mention Evan Neal. Okay, we need to talk about Evan Neal. I think he should move inside the guard. Whether or not he's willing to do that, it's going to be a big question for me. And I still have him listed here, tackle. Ultimately, I do not think he is a tackle at all. You need to move him in, give him the Mekhi Becton treatment. Hopefully, things can work out there and at least give you some competition too with Greg Van Roten. No matter what, though, I am looking to upgrade this interior of the offensive line because, hey, they could even use a center possibly upgrade. John Michael Schmitz has not quite worked out to this point. Not ready to give up, but he has to get stronger, man. He's got to get some more sand in those pants and really grind on that leg strength, man. Not get pushed back so often. So overall, this is still an area they need to invest some early draft capital in. It's not done, and they still need some more depth on this offensive line. So it will be an early need for me. And then we go on to the wide receiving, the tight end room here, which still needs some more investment. Overall, it's looking decent. You got Malik Neighbors, who to me is a true number one difference-making wide receiver, or at least he has that potential to be. And you got Darius Slayton back, which is awesome. And if you got better quarterback play, I do think Slayton is an underrated wide receiver in the NFL. He is a legit vertical threat down the field. And then you got Wan'Dale Robinson, kind of the exact opposite in terms of he's more of your shallow, takes screens, really short depth of target, things like that. It can be a little bit of a yak threat. He is going into a contract year, and that's why I highlight this. You got to bring out little Jordan Humphrey. He's more of a big Jordan Humphrey, and what a great name, too. We can bring out some rap and G-Sling all day. Let's go. No, but anyway, you got Amir Smith-Marset, good return man. Besides that, though, Jalen Hyatt, can he step up? Bryce Ford-Wheaton, who's that guy if you have an injury? And that, to me, is the big thing here. And that is one of the reasons why, between Wan'Dale Robinson being a free agent after this season, I will be looking at investing a mid-round pick. You can always throw a dart, add another weapon at the midpoint, late point of the draft. And that's really what I'm going to be looking at overall here. Not a early priority, especially having Malik Neighbors, a true number one. It is something, though, I will look at there. Tight end's another option I guess they could look at, but at the same time, I'm not super worried about this year. I really want to see the development of Theo Johnson. Showed some flashes, got to improve his hands and continue to just get better overall as a player. And I expect him to. Tight end position is typically a season, it takes a season or two to really, grow and get big at that position in the NFL. Overall, the tight end room, you got Daniel Bellinger, Chris Manhertz, more of a blocker there. Greg Dulcich, if he can stay healthy, is a good receiving option for them. All three of those guys are free agents after the end of the season. That's why I listed there in green. It's not a high priority, but it is something they could consider at, especially in a good tight end class. If they wanted to add another weapon, they could do that. However, like I said, it's not my top priority with the fact that they got Theo Johnson and showing some ability there and what he can develop into this next season. Then we go on to the running back room here and Tyrone Tracy. And I think Tyrone Tracy is going to be a nice lead back for them going into this next season. Now, I do think there is a option for them to continue to add a little more depth into the room. Devin Singletary, this could be his last season after this next year. He is still under contract, but the cap, they could look to save like $6 million if they so need to or if they want to. That is an option. Eric Gray hasn't really showed anything to this point. And I would be looking for more of a power running back, somebody that can pick up short yardage situations and stuff like that. So maybe at the end of the draft, or even it could be an earlier need depending on who is on the board, right? If a BPA guy falls to you, like a Caleb Johnson, obviously former coach coming over to the New York Giants, maybe that would make sense for them. However, all that being where it's at, I do think right now it's not a top priority. It could be upgraded. At the same time, I think that they're in a pretty good spot here with Tracy and Singletary this season. And then maybe next year they could really add and bolster because running back's not a position necessarily that you have to draft and develop in that regard. But you do need some depth, and that is where I'm going to be looking at here. It's time to talk about quarterbacks here. We got famous Jameis and Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson. I love it. Tommy DeVito, too. Oh, man, we got all the names out, all the Hollywood names, right? Tommy DeVito, Danny DeVito, whatever, man. They've got some cool ones out here. It is a very tough conversation, and you look at this quarterback room, the choices were very limited in this case scenario, and hopefully Mr. Unlimited will be a guy that can come in right away and stabilize this quarterback room. They've got a talented roster and a team that they legit can get to the playoffs. I believe that. This roster is underrated at this point. It is a very good football team that can continue to improve this offseason with some upgrades in the draft. So I'm actually very optimistic about this roster and what Joe Schoen has done. But at the same time, I also understand this move after what looks to be the Titans and the Browns more than likely going to be locked in on a quarterback. Maybe the Browns is still a little unfamiliar until we know more with the Shedeur Sanders Pro Day. Overall, though, what this allows the Giants to do is at least have something in place. And for a GM and head coach and Brian Dable, Joe Schoen, that could be a little bit on the hot seat, right? If they don't win this season, it's like, you might be out of your, might be out. And if you draft a quarterback or you trade up, do all these things, well, you're just drafting a quarterback for the next GM and the next coach. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And you see that a lot happening in nowadays. So that is why I think this move is actually smart for them and also a good idea for the organization as well. Because in this quarterback class, once again, is there a possibility that Shedeur or Cam Ward end up being franchise quarterbacks or somebody later on, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe? Maybe. That is definitely a possibility. Overall, though, I do think it's smart and it allows them to say, let's go with Russell Wilson. Let's try to get to the playoffs. And that, could save our jobs by winning football games. And if they do that, then John Mara might say, okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to give them the keys for 2026 to be able to go after a quarterback that they like. And then we can draft and develop and do all those things. So in general, I think it's a really good move for everybody in this case scenario, for the organization, for the head coach, Brian Dable, the organization, Joe Schoen, etc. I really think it's a smart, and for the fans, you don't have to reach maybe on a quarterback or trade a ton of draft capital and all those sort of things. So I like where they're at. I'm not really wasting a pick in this draft class. Roll in next season with Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and then you figure it out next year at the quarterback position and you go get your franchise guy, hopefully in a more deep quarterback class. That's where I'm at personally. If they wanted to invest in a quarterback on day 2, you could do it. But a lot of times when that happens, they just end up drafting a quarterback next year and then they throw that quarterback to the wayside. At least that's my view on it. And that's why I'm not probably personally going to be wasting a pick on a quarterback. I shouldn't say waste. You never know, right? You never know what you're going to hit. You got to be in the market, though, to get it. Now we go into the defense side of the ball, and we start with the defensive line. What's crazy is you got the Philadelphia Eagles in this division. We always talk about their defensive line. But you know what? The Giants, after this next season, might have the best defensive line in this division. When you bring in the possibilities that you draft Abdul Carter in this defensive line, you got KT, Brian Burns, Chauncey Golston can play inside out, especially on rushing downs. He move him inside. But on base formations, you could have Golston out there and whatnot. So I love it. You have Victor DiMcKee, kind of an underrated signing there as well. And then you look at this interior defensive line. It does need to improve, especially run defense-wise. They could use another guy that can rotate in there with Sexy Dexy as a big fella who can stop the run. That way you can keep Sexy Dexy fresh at that nose tackle position and allow him opportunities around this defensive line as well. They did bring in Roy Robertson Harris and Jeremiah Ledbetter. And at this point in Roy Robertson Harrison's career, I think he's good at, rotational players. And Jeremiah Ledbetter, solid rotational player. You got Elijah Chapman. I am going to be adding to this defensive line. You got Raheem Nunez, Roches. I mean, I love him and his personality, what he brings on and off the field. I do think they need to upgrade, and he's going to last year of his contract. So it just makes sense for them to add another big monster in there that can stop the run, right? That's really what they need in this defensive line, is somebody that can just kind of make life easier for your linebackers and make it easier for Sexy Dexy to be another guy in this room. So they got a lot of depth right now, but I do think that they can really add somebody else, another monster into the room. And it will be something we look at on day 2 in the depth of this draft class. And then we talked about bringing Abdul Carter in here possibly as an option, or Travis Hunter certainly is on the table if they don't go quarterback too, and maybe even a trade back. There's multiple. We'll get into the draft of that portion, but this defensive line looking pretty scary and could even be scarier very, very soon. Linebacker wise, this is something I will be looking at in the draft. I think it is a mid to later portion of the draft need, and the reasoning for that is because Bobby Okereke, a little bit down year. And when it comes to this defensive philosophy and Bowen, what he's looking to do, and he maybe took a bit of a step back here for him, but Micah McFadden's a good football player. He's going into a contract year. Bobby Okereke, like I mentioned, somebody that you got to keep an eye on. I think he's a really good football player, just had a bit of a down year. I expect to bounce back. He is somebody that could be cut after this next season. I doubt it. However, you could save $9 million if you decide to do that. You got Darius Muasau. Definitely think he can be a really good, solid depth piece. You got Deontay Johnson, Chris Board, good special teamer there. Demetrius Flanagan Flores, also another special teams impact for this football team, rotational player. And overall, what I'm looking to do is drafting and developing a linebacker of the future, right? I think that is something that this team could be looking at in the mid-round section. Not an early need, but it is something I will be looking at. The linebacker play for this football team, I felt like was a little rough at times this season. So I want to at least add some more competition into the room. On to the secondary, starting off with the cornerbacks. And we need to start with that big addition, that big price tag, Paulson Adebo. I think he earned it. And I actually think he would have been paid a lot more had it not been for the femur injury. So that is something you got to consider. And I get that that was a reasoning for maybe the lower price tag. But in terms of on the field, I think Paulson Adebo is one of the best corners in free agency, if not the best corner in free agency. He's very much a lockdown, can be a true number 1 corner, a young player at that. So there's a little bit of risk with the injury. However, the upside is tremendous, and what he brings to the table. I mean, there are some issues with Paulson Adebo. He's not a perfect player or any things like that. I do think he's a little grabby at times. Overall, though, going to be a nice addition for Shane Bowen and his defensive philosophy that does allow you to get up in your face and play some man-to-man. They'll go into their cover 1 looks plenty. And, he'll mix up his zone. He plays a lot of cover 3, cover 4 looks, and et cetera, and some mixing cover 2 stuff. In general, though, Adebo going to be a great ad, and it's going to take some pressure off Deonte Banks. Is the kind of he was trying to do that number 1 corner, but allows him to hit the reset button on Banks. Hopefully, get some of those question marks about his work ethic, or maybe his hustle on the football field. Right, he needs to show some of that, and hopefully not get benched this next season. You got Cordell Flott, though, will be competing for him. And remember, Flott gives you inside-out versatility, especially if Phillips gets injured or whatnot. So I think this cornerback room looks pretty good. However, I will be still looking to add to this room, especially if Deonte Banks doesn't work out, right? And there's a chance that, unfortunately, he just may not work for this football team. Like, he's a super sticky corner. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. Like, he is super sticky in coverage. He just needs to work better on turning his head to the football and locating skills and things like that. That, I feel like, is his biggest problem besides the hustle and the drive. Those 2 things, if he can work on those, man, he's got a lot of upside and can be a really good cornerback. So I'm not ready to give up on him. And I will still be drafting somebody mid to late rounds as the developmental guy. Give him a little bit more depth in here with Trey Hawkins. It's not a high priority, though. This is something, once again, on day 3, 5th, 6th, 7th round, they could be looking at just for a little more depth purposes. And then last but not least of this roster breakdown, before we get into the mock draft, the safety room, which looks pretty dang good. And their upside here is pretty dang good. You got Javon Holland, who they got in from Miami. Nice guy. I thought he was going to get more than that, too. I really did. So I thought that was a really good signing. Yeah, he's coming off a down year, but the talent, he is one of the better safeties, talented-wise, in the NFL. And he could be this team's saving the position from when they let go of Xavier McKinney, right? They made a mistake by letting go of Xavier McKinney and not paying him. And I do think that Joe Shane learned from that mistake. And he said, you know what? We're going to go get a talented guy. Javon Holland will have a huge impact. I'm very confident, barring injury, to say that he is going to be a big time piece for the secondary. And you got Tyler Nubin. I think Nubin's going to have a more productive year this season when he just kind of gets a little bit more footing under him. You got Dane Belton as a backup. I'm cool with that. And I do think they still need to add a little bit more depth in this room. They're thin at the moment, so I will be looking at adding another safety at some point in this draft, and maybe it's still something they can bring in as a veteran option in free agency. They've got a little bit more money to spend. It's drop time! And we look at this number 3 overall selection for the G-Man. Oh, it's Abdul Carter. All day! That's what we're going. And this is actually really good news. And the Giants fans, you got to be patient. You got to look at this situation and say to yourself, we're arguably getting the best player in the entire draft. Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, very, very close. But Carter is going to be a huge impact on this defensive line. I'm sure you've seen those Eagles flying all day with that defensive line, how good they have been and what success that's brought them. Well, and hey, the Giants know that as well, going back to the Justin Tuck and O.C. Umayara days. Now you go and build that type of defensive line. Legit, this defensive line will be one of the greatest Giants defensive lines possibly in history. Like, there is the potential for that. You got Brian Burns. You got KT. You got Abdul Carter now. Chauncey Golston gives you the versatility. And then, of course, Sexy Dexy on that interior. And we're not done adding to that interior just yet. But Abdul Carter, I'm not saying this either. Like, people say trade Kayvon Thibodeau. I wouldn't even say that. I'd just say keep him, honestly, unless you get an offer you cannot refuse. There has to be the horse on the bed, like something legit that I cannot turn down to be able to trade. I'm keeping all of those guys at our arsenal and just having an elite defensive line. I'm rocking with that all day. So to me, you get Abdul Carter on this defensive line, call it a day, and I'm so excited about that. And then into round number 2, we're going to go on the offense side of the ball, and I'm going to go ahead and Donovan Jackson, the interior offensive lineman from the Ohio State University, who played tackle, and he saved the Buckeye season in many regards by moving over to left tackle, and he knows a little thing about Abdul Carter, of course, because that was his first game that he moved over to left tackle for Josh Simmons. It was a rough game, right? But they're going to be able to work with each other in practice, and this also gives them ability where Donovan Jackson could end up being the right tackle of the future. It's possible. Like, Donovan Jackson has legit tackle traits. He's got insane arm length. What is it, like 36-inch arms, whatever. Like, he's got insane arm length. He's got enough foot speed. I don't know if he's got good enough foot speed to be able to handle the tackle situation in the NFL. It's a very good question. But what he showed at the end of the season, man, it definitely opened the table or the option of that. And it's something to keep an eye out on for sure. However, look, move him inside to guard for right, or keep him inside for the time being, and then maybe right tackle next year. If that opens up with Jermaine Illuminor, you give Donovan Jackson that opportunity to be the right tackle and at least give you a swing tackle as well, which I think he'd be a better option even than what they have currently with Stone Forsythe and James Hudson. So Donovan Jackson going to be a huge addition to this offensive line. He's got one of the strongest down blocking, run blocking ability in this entire draft class. He just is a punisher with his hands. He's got some strength profile up there with Tyler Booker. We're not done adding punishers into this defense and offensive lines. Like, we got a lot of punishers on this defensive offensive line. Now you go to Alfred Collins from Texas, who's going to be an enforcer in the run game. And that is exactly what they need. I get it. He may not be the pass rusher, and that's okay. I just want him to say, do the dirty work. That's really what Alfred Collins can do for this football team. He really doesn't have much pass rush. Let's be honest. He is he's not a guy that can't develop in that pass rush because he's got athletic traits. But right now, his hand technique, his pass rush plan, it's very, very limited. But what he does do well, his particular set of skills, well, he can hold the point of attack. He don't get pushed back. Let's just be real. I mean, his pads can get a little high. He is a taller player. Overall, I think he does a good job holding the point of attack. He can play that true nose for this football team and really hold and be somebody that basically say you hold the line, you keep it in clean for Sexy Dex and these defensive linemen, and I feel really good about that. And then we go on to Barrett Carter, the linebacker from Clemson, going to give them some more speed and more coverage prowess in this room as a developmental guy. I thought the value at this point was really good, so I couldn't pass up on him. And it does add more fuel into this linebacking core. And the way you can use Barrett Carter early on, if you want to get him out there, like if he's looking really good, you got Micah McFadden, Bobby Okereke, solid players Once again, though, I think Carter can play a multitude of roles. He can play a little Sam linebacker position for them, and certainly somebody that can line up even as a big slot type of guy. He's got that legit type of athleticism. He's more of a smooth athlete. I know his combine time wasn't insane, but his play speed is really good. Now, I will say he took a bit of a step back, in my opinion, in terms of his coverage ability this year. And I did see him get beat at times, but mainly when he did get beat this season, it was just lack of turning his head. And that is something that you can work on and get better at. And sometimes you just have a little bad luck. And that's what I think it really was. Like, he was hip for hip with covering running backs or tight ends. And that is what I see him to be, as somebody that could be a really good coverage player. You got Micah McFadden, who's kind of that missile. And you got Darius Muasau, who's also a nice little run defender. Bear Carter can be that weak side linebacker developmental guy if they do have to let go of Bobby Okereke in the future. And then we go on to our 4th round selection, Jalen Lane. He brings lanes. I'm telling you, he breaks lanes because he's so freaking fast. He's got speed for days. One of the fastest on tape guys out there. He is a burner. He's electric. He's explosive. You get the ball in his hands, he certainly can produce. But he does have more vertical ability than Wan'Dale Robinson has. He's got a lot more speed, I'll tell you that right now. Anyway, and he's also a good route runner, too. The big thing with him that he's going to have to get better at and improve upon, and you look at that size listing, now he's pretty dense, but he does get evoked by play strength, right? That is not his strength of his game. His is that play strength, right? He gets pushed around at times, and it will be a bit more of a problem at the next level. And that's why I think he's a developmental guy. He's going to be going to need a season, but he can also give you some special teams ability early on, too. So Jalen Lane, I like him as a developmental slot receiver for this football team. Next pickup, we're going with Bilal Kone from Western Michigan. We're going to go get this big, tall cornerback. I mean, he's got solid size, 6'1", a little over 6'1", 190. And he's going to give them some more depth in the cornerback room, as I talked about, just in case, right? If Deonte Banks does not work out, I want to make sure we're just throwing darts at adding more secondaries. It could be a little bit of a sneaky need, in other words. So just getting Bilal Kone in here, I think would be a really nice add for them. He's a really well-rounded corner. I thought some of his best, what I saw out there between the Wisconsin, Ohio State tapes, he was pretty dang good in those, even though if he was going against the backups at times because they were getting blown out, whatever. But I think that Kone gives you something there as a guy that it can be a good project, backup corner, and some more depth. And then next pick, we're going with Kitten Crawford. And here's another, kind of smaller school, Nevada, bigger school than Western Michigan, but definitely out west there. He doesn't get a lot of attention. He transferred over from Texas this past season, and he's a solid athlete. I think he's actually a very good athlete, too. He can move. He really can. I actually think he can play a little bit of slot. He's got that type of movement skills to his game. Like, he has good change of direction, everything like that. So somebody that gives you a little bit more ability to come down in the nickel and be able to cover on certain downs as a big dime package guy, just getting more depth. That's really what this pick is. I see him as somebody that can be a versatile player in your secondary. If nothing else, core special teamer, but definitely has the ability to cover and do things like that one-on-one. And then final pick of the draft, I'm going with Phil Maffa, the running back from Clemson. He certainly brings the tiger to the backfield in terms of his strength. He can plow through some dudes, right? He's not the fastest guy, I'll tell you that right now. He seems a little slow on tape at times, but he definitely has some power. And when you let him build up a little bit and get him going, he does have some break tackle ability for sure. I'll tell you that right now. A stiff arm that can be mean and lethal. So I love that about Phil Maffa. And his vision's okay. I wouldn't say he's got elite vision or anything like that, but certainly can run. And as a rotational power back, a goal line back. That's really my envision of this pick, just adding a little more depth at the end of the draft in the running back room. Here it is, the recap and what we've been able to do in the draft. Everybody's going to have different opinions about the players that are being drafted. Ultimately, that is just what it is, right? And you have to be going into this saying to yourself, who fits the scheme? Who do we like on and off the field? Who do we think is going to be a big difference maker for us in this organization? They're going to go through and vet their process. This is just some of the guys that I picked out personally that I feel like can fit the scheme. Once again, it's not perfect, but this is what we did, and we got some help on that offensive line, which to me was the top priority on this offense, was getting some more offensive line help. And I think Donovan Jackson gives you that ability to be able to play in a lot of different roles, too, for them, whether that's a long-term right tackle or as a starting guard early on. He at least competes with Greg Van Roten at that right guard position. Or, hey, if they wanted, John Runyon can move back over to right guard, and Donovan Jackson could play more of his native position over at left guard. So there's a lot of possibilities for this football team with drafting a guy like Donovan Jackson. So I really think that he would be a great addition to this football team. And like I said, you never know. Jermaine Illuminor being a free agent next season, If they move on from him, then he certainly gets them an option to go in there and compete, and also gives them a hybrid swing tackle. It was kind of a 2-for-1 pick, right? That means that we didn't have to draft a swing tackle either. So that's kind of what that pick, to be honest. Hey, I love the versatility that Donovan Jackson brings. And it is important when you're drafting some of these guys. What do they bring outside their position? And I think Donovan Jackson can do a lot of those things that we need. And then besides that, I wanted to get another playmaker in here. Hey, they need to add more points, right? And with Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, who ends up being the quarterback, I would imagine Russell Wilson is the day one starter as of right now. However, we shall see how things work out there. I didn't want to spend another pick on a quarterback. That's just me. As I mentioned earlier, why spend like a day 2 or an early day 3 pick on another quarterback when I just feel like the next season they're going to be on the quarterback class anyway? And there's a chance that they find pay dirt and find a steal in the draft. I totally understand that. It definitely can happen. But once again, more than likely, they're going to be back in the draft class for the quarterback position next year. And it just makes more sense to me that you go and spend some of those picks elsewhere to improve the roster, et cetera. Give all the tools for one of these veteran starters. And that helps Joe Shane and Brian Daboll out right now to be able to win football games and hopefully keep their job. Because I want them to keep their job. I think Joe Shane has done a really over. I mean, there's some things, everybody can make mistakes and whatnot, but I actually think he's done a pretty dang good job of building this roster up. So I got to give credit where credit's due. We added Jalen Lane, another playmaker with some speed, can be a developmental guy for them, and Phil Maffa as a backup power running back for them. And then on the defense side of the ball, my main priorities were, well, let's just beef up the defensive line more right now. Why not? And Abdul Carter being there. Look, Travis Hunter would be a great selection for them too. Give him another cornerback, especially if they were really low on Deonte Banks going into the season. If that's the question, then they can do that, right? But for me personally, I'm adding Abdul Carter there and making this defense line Philadelphia Eagle level scary. And that's what I see right now. Abdul Carter. I don't even have Abdul listed as a starter. That's when you know this defense line could be legit scary. Yes, they could trade KT. I totally understand that. Like I talked about earlier, the offer would have to be something I can't refuse, because right now I'm just saying, let's just keep rotating pass rush between Brian Burns, KT, Abdul Carter. Remember, injuries happen too. And you have Chauncey Golston who can play inside on pass rushing down, so they can keep those guys all fresh and hopefully healthy through the season. And you would have a insane pass rushing duo. And we didn't even mention Sexy Dexy on that interior, of course. And we had an Alfred Collins, who I just I put him in that nose tackle position. He could end up playing one of those base ends too, because he did it at Texas. He played all up and down that defensive line for Texas in the Hook'em Horns. So I just list him as somebody that can give you rotation in there early on as he continues to develop. But as an early down run defender, he's going to win big time in that regard. Keep those linebackers clean, and it was definitely a weakness for them this season. And as I was mentioning earlier, I also felt like linebacker was a bit of a position of weakness this season for them. I thought Okereke had a bit of a down year. However, like I said, he is still a very talented player. I like Micah McFadden a lot. IU Hoosiers, let's go. You know how it is. But you look at this linebacking core, I still want to add to it. And you got Darius Muasau, Chris Board, definitely some depth there. Deontay Johnson, etc. And Demetrius Flanagan Floles. But Barrett Carter comes in as a developmental will linebacker who's got coverage ability for this football team. Just in case they have to move on from Bobby Okereke, if he has another down season, that would make sense to get some sort of development in this room. And then last but not least, I'm just adding some more depth at cornerback and safety just for those depth purposes. In general, though, that is going to be it here for our roster breakdown and mock draft. Certainly let me know what you think, agree or disagree. What would you do differently in the whole look of this? There's a lot of different options. Would you draft a quarterback still? I'm just not quite there. And as I mentioned, I think it would just be smarter to go into next season and then you figure this thing out and determine whether or not the coach and GM should still be here. And then you draft a quarterback in 2026 if that comes to that point. Overall, I think that's really the way to go, and then try to build this roster for right now and win football games. I hope you guys have a really good day, though. My name's G Slang. I'm doing my thing. I will talk to you later.